In 1885, the home insurance building rose 10 stories above the streets of Chicago. Steel frame, glass, precision. We call it the first skyscraper. We give it a name, a date, and a creator, William LeBaron Jenney. Clean story, neat timeline, case closed, and then we move on. But here's the part we don't really sit with. How did they actually build it? Not the theory, not the drawings, not the polished narrative printed in textbooks. I mean the real process, the logistics, the materials, the labor, the coordination. The reality of raising something that heavy, that precise, that ambitious. In a world without modern cranes, without digital tools, without reliable electricity in many places. How? That's not rhetorical. It's literal. Because when you start looking closely at late 19th century construction, something feels off. Not missing in a vague way, missing in a very specific way. We have photographs, plenty of them. Finished buildings, detailed facades, ornate interiors. We have portraits of architects, investors, politicians smiling at ribbon cuttings. We have newspaper coverage, speeches, celebrations. But what we don't have, at least not in proportion to the scale of these projects, is a clear, step-by-step visual record of how they were actually built. And that's strange, because real progress usually leaves a messy trail, a long middle phase full of mistakes, failures, and visible learning curves. You can see it in early aviation, decades of failed gliders before flight finally worked. You can see it in steam engines, in automobiles, in photography, in computing. Every major technology stumbles before it stabilizes. But with these buildings, that middle phase is thin. Where are the failed skyscrapers? The partial collapses? The awkward early attempts that didn't quite work? The structures that show trial and error? They're rare, suspiciously rare. Instead, what we see are buildings that arrive almost fully, formed, confident, precise, and incredibly complex from the start. Take 1902, Flatiron Building, 22 stories, a steel skeleton wrapped in limestone and terracotta, narrowing into that razor-thin edge at the intersection of Broadway and Fifth Avenue. Stand beneath it, look up, and you feel it, that subtle sense of disbelief, not just admiration, something deeper, because your instincts understand weight, gravity, effort, and something about it feels ahead of its time. Now jump continents. In 1888, the Rialto Building rises in Melbourne, a city that had only been a European settlement for about 50 years. Gothic revival detailing, intricate stonework, cathedral-level ornament. 50 years. That's barely enough time to establish basic infrastructure, let alone produce that level of craftsmanship at scale. And it's not isolated. Late 1800s, São Paulo, Buenos Aires, Cairo, Shanghai, Mumbai. Different continents, different economies, different cultures. Same outcome. Highly ornate, technically sophisticated buildings appearing within a narrow window of time, sharing not just style, but execution quality. That's where the coordination problem starts to feel real. Because architecture isn't just design, it's labor. And that brings us to something even harder to explain. The Biltmore Estate, built starting in 1889. Massive scale. Dozens of rooms. A banquet hall with a 70-foot ceiling. Thousands of individually carved stone elements. Materials transported across states, requiring dedicated rail infrastructure. Completed in about 6 years, with a workforce of roughly 1,000 men. No modern power tools, no automation, no digital precision systems. Just skill. But here's the problem. Skill like that doesn't appear overnight. A master stonemason takes years, often decades, to train. You don't just assemble 1,000 of them on demand in a rural location, complete a project, and then have them disappear without leaving a traceable legacy. Skills like that require systems, guilds, apprenticeships, lineages. So where are those systems? Where are the records? That's where things start getting uncomfortable. Because the explanation we're given isn't wrong. It's just incomplete. We're told architectural schools, especially institutions like the École des Beaux-Arts, spread design principles globally, and that's true for design. But architects don't carve stone. They don't forge iron details. They don't execute ornament at scale. Craftsmen do. And the networks that trained those craftsmen, the workshops, the guilds, the long chains of apprenticeship, are strangely underdocumented across the world all at once. That pattern repeats too consistently to ignore, so people start asking bigger questions. Some point to old maps referencing Tartary, a vast, loosely defined region that appeared on maps well into the early 1800s, then gradually vanished as territories were renamed and absorbed. Now, that doesn't mean there was some hidden empire building everything, but it raises a different kind of possibility. What if the knowledge didn't originate where we think it did? What if it was inherited? Transferred through migration, trade, or displacement from regions whose histories aren't fully documented? What if the late 19th century wasn't the beginning of this architectural capability, but the final expression of something much older? Because look at the ornament. If you're inventing new building methods from scratch, under pressure with limited tools, you prioritize function. You simplify. Decoration comes later. But that's not what we see. From the very beginning, these buildings are overloaded with detail. Gargoyles, carvings, reliefs, intricate metalwork, symbolic imagery. And not as decoration added later. Integrated, structural, planned from the start. That's not experimentation. That's confidence. That's inherited knowledge. And then something else happens. By the early 20th century, it fades. Ornament disappears. Styles simplify. Modernism takes over. The official explanation? Efficiency. Changing taste. New philosophy. Maybe. Or maybe something else happened. Maybe the knowledge that sustained. That level of craftsmanship wasn't being replaced. Maybe the people who held it aged out, and there was no system left to pass it on. Because if a knowledge system collapses, not gradually, but structurally, the result wouldn't be total silence. It would look exactly like what we have. Fragments, partial records, names without histories, photos that start halfway through. Construction. Skills without clearly documented origins. Not erased history. Incomplete transmission. And when you zoom out, the pattern becomes hard to ignore. Capability appearing faster than expected. Coordination happening across continents, without modern communication. A fully developed architectural language deployed almost simultaneously worldwide. And then, decline. Not evolution. Disappearance. So what does that leave us with? Not a neat conclusion. Not a clean alternative theory. Just a question. A persistent one. When you walk past those 19th century buildings, the ones with the carved stone, the ironwork, the impossible detail, look at them carefully, not as history, as evidence. And ask yourself something simple. Does the story we've been told actually explain how they were built? Or does it just describe what we see? Because there's a difference, and once you notice it, you can't unsee it.